Hi, I'm Josh Rushing, sitting in for Femi, and you're in the stream. Today, Sochi has a deadly past. Should the history of the Olympic host city be recognized, or is it time to move on? I'm joined by our digital producer, Malika Bilal, who will be going through your tweets today. Malika, tell us, how did we get this show topic today?
One of my favorite ways, it was pitched by our community. We were actually doing a show on the Olympics not too long ago, last month, and we were bombarded with tweets from people saying, you actually need to cover this little aspect gets very little coverage.
So wait, social media actually works.
It works. This is living proof. And so there is a conversation online. I want to share a little taste of what that conversation is. People are sharing things like this. Images. This is images of the Olympic rings, and you see someone in traditional Circassian dress. Here's another one. This was one also used the hashtag No Sochi 2014, and you see here in the lenses and the reflection of a ski slope, you see people on using Circassian dress, traditional dress. So of course, this conversation is happening online, but it can't happen without you. So we want you to join it using hashtag AJStream.
That's one of the coolest parts about this show, actually, is that the audience actually influences the show, both with their tweets during the program and even with their pitches. So if you have a pitch, if you want to see a story on the stream, go to Facebook. It's actually a great way to reach us. You can tell us your idea on there. Maybe one day you'll actually see it in the stream.
Hi, my name is Stalin K. I'm a documentary filmmaker and a human rights activist based in India, and I am in the stream.
Sochi, Russia. It's the site of the 2014 Winter Olympics and a mass killing. The Olympic torch has arrived in the Black Sea resort town, its final destination for Friday's opening ceremony. But not everyone's celebrating. Ethnic Circassians are protesting what they call Russia's cover-up of the first modern genocide. Some 150 years ago, Tsarist Russians took Circassia and its capital city Sochi by force. During the conflict, it's estimated at least 1 million Circassians died, and as many were relocated. The end result, one of the world's largest diaspora populations. Now, searching for identity, they want their history recognized. But Russia tells a different story. So what's the truth, and does it matter today? With us is Fatima Slis, a Circassian investigative journalist and expert on Russia's North Caucasus. She currently works with Voice of America. In New York, Andronik Migranyan is a former member of Russia's Presidential Council. He currently heads the Institute for Democracy and Cooperation. Tamara Barsic, co-founder of the No Sochi 2014 campaign. And in Los Angeles, Walt Richmond, head of the Russian Studies program at Occidental College. Fatima, you were telling us a bit about your dress in the pre-show. I think it's fascinating, and I want to ask you about it. But first, can you, very shortly, in about a minute or so, give us a bit of the history of Sochi for the Circassian people?
Well, Sochi for the Circassian people is very important because it was the last capital of our nation. First of all, it was the place where the last battles took place. Also, Krasnaya Polyana was the place where there was the Russian army celebrated the deportation and mass killing of the Circassians 150 years ago. When I'm talking about these separate events, it doesn't mean that it was very quick. For my nation, this war lasted for 101 years. We look at the map created by the Russian military archive map in 1837, and we count 1,007 villages on the Black Sea coast in Sochi and around Sochi. Now there are 5.
Let me jump in and just ask if we can grab my computer right now. We have a map that shows the area before the Russian conquest. The green area on that map, as you can see, that's the people, the Circassian people, before the Russian conquest, and here it is after the Russian conquest. So what does it mean to you as a Circassian for the Olympics to come to Sochi?
Well, Olympics themselves are now, particularly these Olympics become a problem, a question mark. their morality and their connection mostly to the sport or to the politics. But in this particular Olympics in Sochi, for the Circassians, not only me, for all the Circassians, these Sochi Olympics mean the coverage of all the evidence of mass atrocities on the Black Sea coast in Sochi.
When you mean the coverage, do you mean metaphorically or do you mean
literally? No, I don't mean metaphorically. In archives, there are the reports of the funeral commissions. There were commissions all around Sochi that were recording bi-weekly all the mass graves, all the people. And if you look at the map created based on those reports, you will be absolutely amazed. So all these constructions are covering these mass graves. The Circassian elders from local Circassian elders appealed to the Russian parliament 5 times, asking for investigation of the Black Sea coast or the Sochi territory for the mass graves, so they can properly, organize funerals for their ancestors.
Well, give me a sense of where you're saying the mass graves are in relation to all the new buildings that are there for the Olympics.
Absolutely.
Where are they? Are we talking a mile down the road are the mass graves, and then there are the buildings for the Olympics?
All the way from the coast up to the mountains, where the Olympics are built, Krasnaya Polyana itself, everywhere there are mass graves.
Andronik, I'm sure you're hearing this, and as I understand it, the official Russian view of this is different than Fatima's shared with us. Can you tell us
Yeah, I think that this is a clear case of distortion of history. The problem is that starting with the name of Circassians, this is the name which Turks give these ethnic tribes which lived in the south of Russia, which means throat cutters or head cutters from Turkish, if you translate that. Self-name of these people in the south of Russia was Adige. I've been many times in Maikop, in Adigean Republic. Now this nation inside Russian Federation and inside Soviet Union is in frames of 3 autonomous republics. They are very well established, they are very prosperous, they are widely presented in Russian culture, in Russian economy, in Russian business and Russian politics. Even on top of that, Russia and Soviet Union and current Russia let them to develop their language, their culture, their economy, even in cases when in some republics they are minorities. And there are different tribes or ethnic groups. They lived in different places, never was a unified Circassians. And in Krasnaya Polyana, Ubykhs and Sadzis lived over there. In other places, in Nalchik, Kabardins lived.
Andronik, let me interrupt you here for a second. Are you saying that a mass killing did not happen?
No. Every empire in a process of expansion have all these kind of tragic, events. When Americans were, expanding in these territories, they, cleaned all this ethnic population, and
so Andronik, you're saying that a mass killing did happen.
When Arabs were developing their empire and caliphate, they either were involving or killing in mass.
Andronik, I'm just trying to get from you. Are you saying a mass killing happened in Sochi?
Mass killing in Sochi never happened.
Never happened.
This is not proven by historical evidence. In some places, it's quite clear happened different kind of killings, because as I said, when empire is expanding and conquering new territories, either this is happening peacefully.
Andronik, you seem to be saying that it didn't happen and then justifying it if it did happen because of what other empires have done. Let's bring in a historian here. Walt, is there any historical evidence for the case that there were mass killings in Sochi?
First off, the first reference to the word that resembles Circassian, Cherkessi, appears in a 13th century Arab document, and it clearly means people who cut your path off, not your throat. But that's something else altogether. There's plenty of evidence that there was mass death, enforced death, that there were massacres occurring in Sochi. This is one eyewitness. His name is Mikhail Vinyukov. He was the cartographer who was sent to the Caucasus to make up new maps for the region. He says, the war was conducted with implacable, merciless severity. We went forward step by step, irrevocably cleansing the mountaineers to the last man from any land the soldiers set foot on. The mountaineers' villages were burned by the hundreds just as soon as the snow melted, but as before the leaves returned to the trees. We trampled and destroyed their crops with our horses. If we were able to capture the villagers by surprise, we immediately sent them via convoy to the shores of the Black Sea. Sometimes there were atrocities bordering on barbarity. That is in Mikhail Venyakov, История заселения Западного Кавказа, pages 249-250. Another eyewitness, Ivan Drozdov, a Russian officer, talks about this in the area of Sochi, literally 150 years ago to the date. It was in early February 1864. On the road, our eyes were met with a staggering image. Corpses of men, women, children, elderly persons, torn to pieces and half-eaten by dogs. Deportees, emaciated by hunger and disease, almost too weak to move their legs, collapsing from exhaustion, and becoming prey to dogs while still alive. That is from Последняя борьба с горцами на Западном Кавказе in Kavkazский сборник, Volume 2, 1877, pages 456, 457.
And while you're giving us these accounts, and it is fascinating to hear, and what's also fascinating is how we're hearing accounts from the descendants of people who say that their ancestors were among these people that were displaced. Amr on Twitter says, the Olympic Games aim to show peace and prosperity. How come they're built it over mass graves? You hear mass graves come up again in this tweet from Genete, who says this will be held in the 150th commemorative year of the Circassian genocide on the mass graves of our ancestors. So Tamara, I want to go to you because we've got lots of video comments actually from people who say that they are the descendants, and they're using the hashtag that your campaign started, the No Sochi 2014. Have a listen to this video comment, and I'd like to know your thoughts after.
When a nation's language, culture, history, people, and land is being erased from this world's memory, that is when the utmost attention must be given to that nation. This is what Circassians have been living with for the past 150 years. We want to move forward, desperately. But how can we when we have this pain in our hearts and weight on our shoulders because Russia is determined to stifle our rights?
So Tamara, she says that Russia is determined to stifle rights. What is happening right now is, we've heard about the past, we've heard about the history of this, but what's going on the ground right now?
Sure, and I'm not surprised to hear Andrei's account of, what's happening in the Caucasus, what's happening to our people. He seems to be an expert on what our people are feeling, but this is a Russian narrative. It's the typical Russian narrative. Now I'm going to give you an account of the Circassian narrative. 9 out of 10 Circassians live in diaspora today. So that means the majority of our nation, including our people in the Caucasus, were affected by this genocide, okay? In 1864, our lives changed forever. Now, what we've been trying to do with this No Sochi movement is build a platform so that we can put enough pressure on Russia to make real changes for our people. This idea of genocide has never stopped, okay? For us, it's a continual genocide because when I get onto the phone with my family in Syria and they're telling me about 4 Circassian villages being decimated, about 2 members of my family being killed, I think to myself, wow, seems like a genocide is still happening. And I'll tell you why. Because of Russian policy. This is Russian policy towards Syria, and it's Russian policy towards our people living in diaspora. We have no right to return to our nation, especially in times of crisis. And that's the one thing that our people are really looking for. We're not asking for, something grand. We're asking for the right of return. And what we would like to do is see if we can build a harmonious space in the Caucasus with the Russians so that we might be able to thrive in the future. $51 billion is being spent on the Olympics, okay? Can't a couple million be spent on the indigenous people of the land to make sure that they thrive and they live in the future? Assimilation is something that's affecting us all over the world, in diaspora and in the Caucasus. We have no idea what's going to happen to us in the future. Our language is endangered now. Our people suffer grave human rights abuses in the Caucasus and on the outside, as we can see in Syria today. So our question to the world is, what's going to happen to the Circassian people if, as long as, we're not using Sochi or something as a platform, what are we supposed to do?
Andronik, you like to answer that?
Yeah, I think that there is a good saying in Russia. We have to separate flies from hamburgers or cutlets. We say mukhiat cutlet, which means the young lady is very passionate. I share her feelings concerning the losses in Syria, but it has nothing to do with Russia. Russian policy in Syria is the only constructive policy in the region, and even the United States followed Russian path in order to solve the problem. But this is one thing,
Might I say something about that?
Hold on a second. I didn't interrupt you. To say that in Russia now genocide is continuing, this is total distortion of history. Because, as I said, Circassians or Adiks, how they call themselves, Adige, they have 3 republics inside Russian Federation. They have every opportunity to develop their language, their culture. I've been in Maikop when in Maikop they very often on regular basis are organizing national festivals, cultural events, not in Syria, not in Jordan where they live, but in Maikop, which is the center of Circassian nation, and they are coming. They are presenting their crafts, they presenting their culture from diaspora. This is the center. Russia is the center of this nation, and Russian state and Russian authorities are letting them to do and to flourish and to cultivate everything which they would like to cultivate.
Can you flourish and can your culture flourish?
Hold on,
just
an event.
Fatima, respond to Andronik there.
Yes, please. I would like to answer both questions, both statements made by Dr. Migranyan. First of all, Syria and Russia's policies in Syria. So Russia's policy in Syria, what does it mean for the Circassians? Circassian minority in Syria consists of 200,000 people. That's a very significant portion of our struggled nation, divided nation. We, the Circassians, many organizations around the world appealed to the Russian government hundreds of times, asking, give these people aid, bring them back to their homeland. They feel connected to this place. They call it home. Let them, allow them to return.
Is what Andronik is saying true? Are there 3 republics where
well, there are 3 republics were created in Stalin's time and divided by Stalin. This divide and rule
this is Adygea, Kabardino-Balkaria, and Karachayeva-Cherkessia.
Yes, Andronik, why there are 3 republics where Kabardino-Balkaria and Karachayeva-Cherkessia consist of 2 absolutely different people, when Kabardins and Cherkess are one people and Balkars and Karachais are one people? Why this division? Why not for ethnical?
Because this was the place where different empires fought over there, and they divided these ethnic groups. Because never was, as I said, unified Circassian nation.
Wait, let me take this from the history. Let me take this from the history to today. As a journalist, are you able to report openly about this issue in Russia?
Well, as a journalist, I was reporting on many issues, including the Circassian question. As a result, I am here today, a political asylee in exile. I was tortured, I was arrested many times. I was intimidated by the Russian Federal Security Services only for doing my job as a journalist, for reporting for Associated Press and for Novaya Gazeta in Russia, in the Caucasus. That is what is happening to journalists.
And you're not the only journalist that this has happened to, right? I'm
Yes.
going to pull up a picture on my computer here, see if we can see it over my shoulder. Can you tell me what this guy's sign says, and can you tell me a little bit about his story?
Yes, absolutely. This is a retired man from Maikop. His name is Asker Milinov. He came to the street in Maikop holding this sign.
This is what Andronique was just talking about.
Yeah, it's a free expression and living and striving in Russia about the Circassians. So this Circassian man comes to the street holding this sign which says, "Why have you destroyed and killed my beautiful, noble people?" Two federal security officers come to him, they break his shoulder, they took him to the jail, they keep him for 4 hours, they let him go. He appeals to the court dismisses the case without even notifying or inviting him, and then he appeals to the European Court for Human Rights. The European Court for Human Rights sends him back a letter. We got your case, we are going to look into it. And that particular day, a man, a colonel of the FSB, comes to his place and tells him, "You have to withdraw your application, your case, your claim from the European Court for Human Rights." Asker tells him, "You can get lost." And this guy says, "We know you have a granddaughter and you love her so much." And he leaves. That night, Asker has a massive heart attack. He spends 4 days in intensive therapy between death and life. Right now, he is still waiting for the answer from the European Court for Human Rights, and he's not sure that his family is safe.
It's tragic to hear those stories, Josh. It's so tragic to hear those stories, but it's because of stories like that that we're hearing people say things like this. On Twitter, Lisa says, "Ask why Circassians are afraid to say anything against the Olympics. It's because of stories like this. Ask about harassment, detainment, and killings." On the other hand, Andronique, there is someone who sent in a comment along the lines of something that you mentioned earlier, that this has not just happened in Russia. Magali on Facebook says, "This is endemic of most majority culture groups who have wronged another population. The plight of indigenous peoples in America is all but forgotten, but no one wants to make reparations because that means someone has to give up privileges." Well, I want to change the subject just a little bit in the few minutes we have, though, to go to this comment on Facebook. Ramsey says, "We will never stop our peaceful struggle until 1, Russia admits guilt and perpetrating what he says is a genocide, 2, recreates Circassia, and 3, allows repatriation of the 5 million Circassians in the diaspora." Walt, do you think that any of those are actually feasible?
In the long term, I think that they are not. In the short term. There's too much hostility, too much suspicion at this point. I don't think the Russians truly believe the Circassians are as sincerely offended by what happened as they are. Part of it is because the actual story is hidden away in these archival documents that I used to write my book. No one else really has seen them. And they tell a completely different story than the official documents, which everyone can get a hold of, which make it seem like something quite different happened than what really happened. And so the suspicion has to be lowered, and some sort of dialogue has to begin before these issues can even begin to be addressed. And I don't see that happening soon.
Historically, wouldn't you say it was Tsarist Russia that did this, and the Tsars were overthrown by the Bolsheviks that led to the Soviets, that led to today's government? I mean, in a way, how could today's government be held accountable for what a government before it did?
That's an interesting question, and I'm not sure whether they can be held responsible at all. Even more so that the entire genocidal campaign in the Caucasus was conducted by the command in the Caucasus, Baryatinsky and Field Commander Yevdokimov, and they were concealing much of it from St. Petersburg and the Tsar. One person in St. Petersburg, the war minister, knew. But it was really a small circle of officers in the Caucasus who engineered this entire thing. I think that just admitting that it happened and that the Russian military was responsible is a good start. But
you even make the point that it's St. Petersburg that was responsible, not Moscow. Stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. On the next show, Femi's back in the chair discussing the latest in the Central African Republic. Violence has gripped the country since March, leaving close to 1 million displaced. We'll talk to our correspondent, Barnaby Phillips, and his producer, Tristan Redmond, to get all the details and the latest. And until then, we'll see you online. You're in the stream's post-show. Are the Winter Olympics bearing a bloody history? With us are Fatima Slis, Andrnik Migranyan, Tamra Barsnik, and Walt Richmond. Thanks, guys, for being here. All right, we're in the post-show. I know, Tamra, that you had something that you wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this week when people are watching the opening ceremonies and they might see some pieces of pan-Caucasian culture, some forms of dancing, I want people to realize that, you know, displaying your culture, which is beautiful and unique to us, isn't enough to appease us. It isn't enough to address the question of our rights and the question of our future. Now, today, and I made a comment about this earlier, you know, there are hundreds of Circassians that have been killed in the conflict in Syria, okay? These Circassians appealed for amnesty from the Russian government and were denied. The deaths of these people is on the Russian government. So you can't say that, you know, the Russian government isn't involved in any way. There are thousands of Circassian refugees right now in Jordan and in Turkey waiting for a reply from the Russian government to be allowed to repatriate back to their nation. There are 6 million
Some families
Circassians
have been allowed to
in exile.
repatriate, right? Right around the number of 200 families been allowed to repatriate. And
Yeah.
are you talking about families who haven't lived in Circassia in 150 years?
Yes. Well, I'd like to address that. A lot of the Circassians that have been, you know, allowed to come back to the Caucasus, they were selected, a few, and the problem is for many of them, they weren't allotted full repatriation status. They were given 3-month visas. So they're living off 3-month to 3-month, okay? Every 3 months they have to pay exorbitant amount of fees to stay in the country, okay? So this isn't a true repatriation program. This isn't a true amnesty program from the Russian government to the indigenous Circassian people. What we want to see going forward is, you know, a little bit more of a harmonious way of working. Instead of, you know, always accusing and battling, why don't we take steps forward to help these people? Because if we don't, I can guarantee you, the Syrian conflict is only going to get worse and more people are going to die.
Andrnik, what do you think about a right of return? Should these families have a right of return?
You know, we have many divided nations, and today the biggest divided nation in the world are Russians. 30 million Russians living outside of Russia. Usually when you are talking about these very delicate issues, you must have at least some knowledge how these things are happening in reality. You know, you can't bring the people and leave them in the field under the sun and tell them do what else you want to do. You know, that's you correctly mentioned that one village from Kosovo was brought to Adygea and settled over there. One thing is to have resources to bring 200 people. Another problem is people are talking now about millions. This must be a real big program. As an Armenian, I know that after Second World War, about 100,000 Armenians were brought to Armenia from different countries of the world, but that was a state policy. It is necessary to discuss on the higher level to plan this kind of things. This is not happening just like this, you know. You want it and it's realized. You have, as I said, we have Kabardino-Balkaria in Russia. This is a republic where Circassians are the majority, and they have their representatives in State Duma, in Council of Federation, in administration of president. We have Adygea, the republic, also having their representatives. This must be raised on a state level, on policy level, not just pushed forward by emotions of some marginal people who are trying.
Kabardino-Balkarian Parliament recognized the Circassian genocide in 1991 officially.
No, but you know, every nation can consider that their nation passed through a genocide because this is the fate of small nations. As an Armenian, I can tell you that Armenians were, killed in Turkey and no Armenians in Turkey. But as I said, what kind of genocide is this when you have 3 republics of Circassians in Russia?
Okay,
It's very strange.
That's a very interesting argument. What kind of genocide is Armenian genocide, which is happened, and I absolutely agree with that. When you have a country, Armenia, that's your argument. You're telling me that there are 3 divided republics, not allowed to call themselves Circassia in Russia.
That's not
and
true.
Then,
because
of that, you said
the name of the republic, Circassia.
Okay, your argument applied to Armenian genocide with Armenian nationhood. How does it sound?
No, listen, again, it's not a talk with the depths, you know, you have to listen what I am telling you.
Andre, I've been listening this entire time. If you don't mind, I'd like to speak now.
Totally annihilated.
Let's give Tamara a chance.
This is exactly the case if we said that, genocide in Turkey.
Andre, hold on just a second there, buddy.
Andre, please.
Go for it, Tamara.
Okay. So what you're saying to us now is that we're very lucky to have 3 republics in the Caucasus. Thank you very much. When our nation was decimated, Circassia, we were given 3 whole republics. Thank you very much, Russian nation. Okay. What I want to say is this. Excuse me, Andre, I allowed you to speak. I want to continue. What I want to say is this, okay? In Syria today, okay, Russians have sent planes to remove Russian descendants, Armenians have sent planes to remove Armenian descendants, and Abkhazians have sent planes to remove Abkhazian descendants. Where does that leave Circassians? Because we don't have a Circassia, there's nobody to send us a plane. What's supposed to happen to these people? They're just going to die because they're a minority in this nation? Tell me, Andre, we're so lucky according to you.
Fatima, I want to come back to you in the dress, and I can tell this is a deeply personal story for you. Yeah. Why you? Like, why are you reporting on this? Why are you here? Why is this so important to you?
Well, I was born in the Caucasus. I grew up in the mountain village. I grew up in the very traditional Circassian family, and my grandmother was the person who made me who I am. And in our tradition, people, because of their past, they believe in oral history. So my history, the history of my people came to me not from school books. You couldn't find a single word on Circassians in the school books. It came to me from my grandmother, my grandmother, and her grandmother. If we are talking about non-existence of the genocide, I just wanted to tell the story of my dress again. This belt came to me, Mr. Migranyan. This belt came to me from my great-great-grandmother. Her entire family died on the Sochi coast during the deportation and the genocide. This part came from my great-grandmother. Her family died in a Solovki in Stalin camp. And this dress was made by the woman who was only making Circassian dresses. Her office in Nalchik last year was shut down by the police. Again, and I'm here in exile for doing my work as a journalist, for writing on Circassian issues in Russia.
So how does it make you feel that the world is watching Sochi this week, and all those journalists are there in Sochi this week to report about the Olympics?
Well, thanks to people like Tamara and the organizations that are very active, people started to learn about the Circassian case. It was the case that was supposed to continue to be hidden from the history books, from geography, from the maps, from everywhere. We should not have been existed until today. So now we still exist. There is a very active diaspora, young people. And when those people are there in Sochi, they are going to report on the Circassian issue because they are looking for balance. I'm a journalist, I know. They will be looking for the balance, and the balance is the stories of human rights violations, massive, and the balance is the story of the Circassian nation.
Well, you mentioned the diaspora and how active they are. They're also very active online. I want to play a video comment from one member of that diaspora who explains why this is so important.
Yes, it's been 150 years since the Circassian genocide. And should we revisit the past? Yes, we should. Because the only way history will not repeat itself is if we acknowledge it. We cannot just forget what happened in the past.
So Tamara, I want to switch to a tweet here from Ken Burke, who says the IOC should never have approved of the Sochi Olympics to start with. But past that, they should hold a minute of silence, bringing us back to the central part of our discussion, which is about the Olympics. What do you want to see happen on Friday?
I mean, if the IOC and the Russian Olympic Committee would be able to hold a moment of silence for the millions of Circassian lives that were taken in Sochi, that would be an amazing first step at reconciliation. I think that past the Olympics, what I really hope to see is that this platform that, we've been able to create as a young, nonviolent movement, I hope to see it grow, and I hope that the international presence and the international platform will help us to, address some of those human rights abuses that are happening to our people on the inside, because we are a voice for the voiceless. A few weeks ago, some Circassians who have opposition to the Olympics in a nonviolent way have always communicated it. They were arrested in Nalchik. And so for us, we want to see the human rights abuses, and truly what we would love to see is a formal program of repatriation and right of return for our people.
Voice for the voiceless. She stole our line.
She did.
That's a Now Jazeera tag. All right, look, that's it for today. Thanks, guys. I want to thank everyone for being here. On the next show, Femi's back in this chair. She'll be discussing the latest in the Central African Republic. Violence gripped the country since March, leaving close to 1 million displaced. We'll talk with our very own correspondent, Barnaby Phillips, and his producer, Tristan Redmond, to get all the details on the latest. Until then, we'll see you online.